Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And we are talking about Star Wars, The High Republic. It is back in our sweet, sweet lives. We are so excited, Sarah. It feels so good.
Oh my God. The fact that we are able to talk about this at this point. Oh, thank God.
So good. So good.
I'm so excited about it. So happy.
Well, today's show, we are talking about Race to Crashpoint Tower, written by Daniel José Older. If you want to hear our first High Republic episode to kick off this new wave of stories, listen to last week's discussion on The Rising Storm, which was a full spoiler discussion on the latest Del Rey novel from Cavan Scott. But today we are turning our eyes over to the middle grade genre, which, in my opinion, has been its strongest in the High Republic. First, we had A Test of Courage by Justina Ireland in Wave 1. Daniel is now dabbling in his first Star Wars middle grade novel. And let me tell you, Sarah, he knocked it out of the park. And I'm just super excited to talk about this book today because it was hilarious. It was hilarious.
Oh, I totally underestimated how funny this book would be. It was such a delight. And I'm really excited that we're going to dive into all things spoilers here because there are some hilarious moments and also just some really touching, sentimental, good Force Star Wars moments that I am just excited to tease out and discuss in detail.
So as we've done on previous episodes, we're going to start with a spoiler-free section. So if you want to get an idea of maybe which book to start with in the High Republic, or you want to know if this is something that you can read on its own, or you just want to get the general gist of it and you love the High Republic, but you're just not sure which one to start with first, that sort of thing. We're going to give you all those details spoiler free, and then we're going to have a very hard cutoff for spoilers for this book. So do be warned there.
Like, we wouldn't just come out and tell you that all the characters died. That would be so rude of us right up at the beginning.
Yeah. Although the High Republic fare was a little rough for some people, but we'll get into it. We'll get into it for sure. For sure.
Probably should say nothing, you know. Maybe the saying of a fake spoiler ends up giving away a real spoiler. So anyway, my lips are sealed
tight
for approximately 4 seconds until you throw it back to me and I say something else. Before we hop into our conversation, all things Race to Crashpoint Tower, I quickly want to highlight our bookstore of the episode. We love indies here at Friends of the Force, and we are not going to let you forget it because today's bookstore is Mysterious Galaxy, and they are an independent bookstore that specializes in fantasy, science fiction, young adult, mystery, and horror, and they've been around since 1993. They're located in San Diego, which makes me really want to go take a road trip down to San Diego for a celebration, but that's just me. Everybody, guys, hop in the car. We're all going. And
after Denny's.
After Denny's. They also ship books around the country, so you can find them at mystgalaxy.com. That's MYST galaxy.com. And you can get your Star Wars books there. You can get your romance books there. Well, some of them, if they're young adult or fantastical or, you know, that sort of stuff. But there are so many amazing books there. They have a great social media presence, so go follow them on Instagram. And I can't wait to go visit Mysterious Galaxy, perhaps at Celebration. I think that'd be really fun.
Perhaps.
So check them out. We love independent bookstores here at Friends of the Force, and we're happy to share Mysterious Galaxy with you today. Please go check them out. And when possible, get your books from an independent bookstore. You'll be paying the full retail price for them, which I know sometimes is tough, maybe not possible all the time.
Yeah.
But when you're able to, the people behind independent bookstores love books. And if you go into an independent bookstore and talk to a bookseller about their favorite books, that is like my favorite thing.
Yeah.
And it's not just because I'm a bookseller and want to be asked about my favorite books, but I just love having conversations with other booksellers about things that they love and customers about books that they love, because then I find something new as well. So walk into an independent bookstore near you and find a great book, maybe a Star Wars book. Anyway, Mysterious Galaxy. That's it. That's the plug. Info down into the description of this show notes of this.
There's no greater pleasure than walking into a bookstore and sifting through all the various sections and finding something, checking out with it, and going home and flipping through the book. Oh, it's just so good, Sarah. You get the smell inside the bookstore. Oh, so good. Love it. Unparalleled.
Tangent, but like my favorite thing is when people walk in the bookstore that I work at and they go, oh my God, I love the smell here. It's happened to me more than a couple times lately. And I'm like, yes, that is exactly the response that I like personally want you to have, because like, same.
I love that so much.
Anyway, Race to Crashpoint Tower. We should talk about that now.
Okay, so the Race to Crashpoint Tower by Daniel José Older. This takes place at the Republic Fair. It follows the Jedi Padawan Ram Jomaram, and he is a mechanical-minded Jedi. He likes working in a shop, repairing vehicles, upgrading droids. He works with some creatures called Bonbraks, who are just so cute, little tiny creatures. He's got an awesome droid, and when the Republic Fair comes to town, his world opens up in an unexpected way. He is very much a Luke Skywalker type character, and somebody who, takes their first steps into a larger world quite literally. And I think this book was a very traditional hero's journey story. Funny enough, and it worked. It worked really well. But Sarah, I want to hear your overall thoughts on Race to Crashpoint Tower, the character of Ram, and how do you feel this book kind of fits into the larger wave so far?
This book, I think overall, is just a really, really fun adventure story. Really interesting. Having read The Rising Storm and having discussed The Rising Storm, seeing how this story fits into the larger picture is really interesting because, it takes place on Valo, it takes place at the Republic Fair, and alongside the events of the main fair. So we're getting a different aspect of it, but this story ends up being really important to the big picture. If you've heard our Rising Storm episode, then you know, but otherwise no spoilers on Rising Storm. But this is just like a really fun time. And I think Ram is a great character to take us through this book because I love it when a character is reluctant to go on an adventure and then really ends up succeeding and having the time of their lives, or, just like a really magical adventure, because basically Ram is this very, as you said, Brad, very mechanically minded, just likes being in the shop, likes working on his puzzles of, what can he fix? What can he upgrade? That sort of stuff. And doesn't really expect to be getting into combat, doesn't really expect to be going all around Valo while the Republic Fair is going on. So it's fun to just watch it all happen. And I think that this is a great installment in the middle grade offerings, as well as the entire initiative thus far, because it's giving us a story that I think really ultimately matters to Wave 2, but also is accessible for adult readers and young readers alike.
Yeah, what I've loved most about this genre of stories is it is so relatable, even if you are an adult. And we've talked about this so many times before. Middle grade is not just for middle graders. If you are so focused on the label of a book, you are going to be missing out on so many incredible stories, not just within Star Wars, but outside of it as well. At any age, you should be reading middle grade stuff or YA stuff. It's all there. It's all brilliant. And this is definitely one of the funniest Star Wars books, if not the funniest Star Wars book I've ever read. Daniel brings like his sense and flavor of humor to this. I mean, all the TikToks he's posted, it's like in the last year since the pandemic started, you would expect this book would bring a lot of the funnies. And I'm honestly, I kind of hurt several points from laughing.
Yeah, it delivers. It definitely delivers. And it's so interesting that the High Republic is shaping up to be something that is major tragedy. And we know that because, it initially starts out with the Great Hyperspace Disaster, which, if you recall, listeners, take yourselves back to reading those first 2 chapters.
It's not great, Bob.
Light of the Jedi. Every single person you meet in those first 2 chapters is gone. They're dead by the end of the chapter. So, tragedy is how it starts out. Tragedy is how it seems to continue. But at the same time, there is some great humor that's going on between Into the Dark, which, like, Geode, comedy king. Are you kidding me? And like these great moments in this book, we're getting a lot of different kind of flavors and a lot of different kind of feelings in this book. And I'm just so in this initiative rather, and I'm just so happy that it's not all like sad, serious tragedy, because that would be boring and depressing. And these sort of stories and these sort of moments really add some levity and also some depth of character. And we'll get to that.
Yeah, and whereas Ram's story is one of breaking out of your comfort zone, on the other side of that, we have Lula, who is on the cover of the book with Ram, and she is one of the central characters of Daniel's The High Republic Adventures comic series that he's been writing. So it's not a spoiler to say, obviously, those storylines come to a head in this novel, and I love the way that he wove that into this book, to the point of you don't need to read the comics to understand this book, because I think there's one page in particular where he kind of sums up everything that's happened so far with Lula and some other characters, but it makes it more accessible to be like, oh, okay, I got the story of the comics, now I can move forward with that context, and you get enough of it. But if you have been reading all the comics, it definitely enriches the story even more, because you've been with those characters for longer, week after week, month after month, watching the story unfold, and it's really rewarding to see it all come together and see how it finally mingles itself into the Republic Fair and the events that happen there. But Lula's story especially was one of centering herself and figuring out her place within the galaxy, much like Ram, although Ram is coming from more of a sheltered background, because he didn't really know things were out there. It's just a matter of knowledge to him. He didn't know all these things could be his world. He just thought the garage was his world, and it's wonderful to see that happen to both of our characters. And I think that's why this book is just so heartwarming. And I would say, if you're looking for a place to start with the High Republic Wave 2, based on how The Rising Storm is, I mean, obviously The Rising Storm is more of a darker novel, given the title. It's more of that darker middle chapter, if we're led to believe there's going to be a third adult novel in phase 1, kind of a trilogy. So I think this book is really uplifting. And I think, looking back, I read this first. I think I would personally recommend this second, because The Rising Storm gives you kind of the setting of everything. And then once you know that piece, you can jump over to the Race to Crashpoint Tower and you're like, okay, I know where we are. Now we're just getting a different point of view. And it doesn't spoil as much as it does in The Rising Storm, although there's not that many, just a couple of things that get kind of teased throughout this one. But what are your thoughts? Where should readers start? And again, you don't have to read these in any particular order. This is just our suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine you would want to read Wave 1 before you read Wave 2, broadly.
Yes.
But we both read Race to Crashpoint Tower before Rising Storm. And I'll say that I don't really feel like I missed out on anything, having read it first.
Agreed.
And so I would argue that you can read this one first or second. And I would not argue against reading it first, because it does present the more uplifting view of the events of The Rising Storm. And pretty much all of the references to characters that we see throughout The Rising Storm, with the exception of one character who kind of crosses over both, are references. So they're not like, oh, you needed to know these 10 plot points in order to kind of get where this reference is coming from. You know that they're engaged in battle, or you know that they are in the proximity of the story, but not in this specific adventure. And they kind of get referenced. So you're not missing out on them one way or the other. And I think it's kind of fun, having read Crashpoint Tower first, to go back into Rising Storm and then see some of those little moments in Rising Storm where we get the characters from Crashpoint Tower, when we get those crossover references that happen in both books. So you say read it second. I'm going to go with read it first.
I was only going with second because like Rising Storm is kind of a chaotic book. And so it's like cleansing your palate with something that's spiritually uplifting after you finish the Rising Storm, because you're just like, yikes.
Well, okay. With that framework in mind,
yes.
100% yes. But if you want to go in with the hopeful picture,
yes,
into Rising Storm and be like, okay, like I know we get to this plot point in this book, so we're at least gonna get there in the Rising Storm, right? Like, I think there's a bit of hope going into Rising Storm if you've read Crashpoint Tower first, because you kind of know where things end, and you're like, okay, we live to fight another day,
Yeah,
and we sure do live to fight another day. So it depends on how you want to frame that.
So the too long don't read version of this is, I think, you should look at figuring out which book you want to read first through the framework of, do you want hope first or do you want hope last? So figure that out for yourself. It's a personal preference entirely. But like you said, you made a great point. Both books tease something from the other, and it is fun either way, no matter which way you read it, no matter which order, you're going to get those fun teases and be like, I knew that thing. Or,
you're like, look,
what's that thing?
Character. There's that moment.
Yeah, and it'll get answered either way. So that's the exciting part. But yes, figure out if you want your hopes and dreams dashed first or second. So
yeah. Oof. But I mean, that's the Rising Storm conversation. That's already on the feed. You can go listen to that.
I want to know, lastly here, Sarah, how do you think the Race to Crashpoint Tower compares to all of the High Republic books that have been released so far? I don't want to get into the conversation of what's good or better or worse, because I don't think that's appropriate. I think every book brings its own flavor, its own taste, its own perspective and point of view. I don't think a single book has missed so far, in my opinion. But where do you feel this book fits in with the tone and just the style of writing? Like, how do you view this overall as part of the larger High Republic mythology so far?
So, for these books, we're still in our establishing phase, which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
I guess my question broadly is are we going to get these characters through the entire series, or just through wave one or phase one, and then they're going to change characters maybe with a time jump or whatever? But that's another question for another day. Within what we have so far, and just looking at these two waves of books, I think this is a really worthwhile addition, because it gives us the hilarity, the adventure in a really action-packed kind of a book. Whereas A Test of Courage was a bit slower. It was a bit more engrossed in its emotions. There was a lot of talk of grief in that book, which I thought was really valuable.
In the dark side too.
Yeah, grief and the dark side, and how we ought to be. And that had good moments of humor and levity with Avon Steros too. But this one, I think, largely kind of puts some of the emotions aside and really dives into the adventure. So I think they're both really valuable stories within this world, especially for this age range. And within the whole thing, I think this is just a good addition that is worth picking up, especially having read the Del Rey novels and knowing that the main story is a lot.
Batshit crazy is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a lot. So, I mean, I'm saying that as somebody who really does love it.
I love it. I've loved every book.
It makes me feel all of the things, but this one I think is just another great addition, and something that's a little bit more on the uplifting end, which is good in a time period that is often, I don't want to say a bit of a bummer, because it's not wow, I feel bad, but ugh.
But
oh my gosh.
Tragedy is coming. We have to get to the fall of the Jedi somehow or another, right?
Yeah.
So, we're on our way there. It's very obvious.
And at the end of Light of the Jedi, we're talking about how Elzar Mann is fearing, he's having visions and they're scary. So,
Yeah.
With no visions of scariness here. Just an adventure that includes some scariness, but mostly just adventure,
Just good vibes. I think of the Backyardigans that, has been taking over TikTok. That is this book. It's just good vibes. The vibes are immaculate. I think the best way to describe this book is serotonin boost, because it is the most feel good of the bunch so far. Because Into the Dark literally has dark in the title, so it's scary. Test of Courage, like we said, is in emotions in the dark side and grief. Light of the Jedi is just literally the great disaster. And The Rising Storm is about the rising storm. So, this, even though it's called Race to Crashpoint Tower, and the title may indicate this is a high stakes chase to get a mission completed and save the day, it is that, but it's in a way that is done so authentically and genuinely, and you just feel good every step of the way with a little bit of action and with a little bit of emotion and intensity, and also some really thought-provoking ideas that talk about a lot of the conversations we have with the Jedi and what it means to be a Jedi and the definition of that. And I think that was really cool to explore in this book, unexpectedly with certain characters that I didn't think were going to appear. Very fun, very fun. So there's a lot to look forward 100%. To in this book.
100%.
I don't think we can talk more about it though without spoilers.
So this is the part where I can say that everybody dies?
Yeah.
So now I can say it now? Oh, okay, cool, cool.
Alrighty, folks. So, spoiler warning ahead. We are going to full spoiler territory on Race to Crashpoint Tower. If you don't want to know what happens, turn back now, read the book, come back. If you just want the lowdown and the synopsis and all the good big moments and all the good funny moments, keep on listening because we are doing it. We're doing it live. Not really live. We're pre-recorded here, but we're doing it live.
Yeah, and we're going to do it right now. Meets. The meats are talking.
Deceptive meats.
Anyway, the Drengir are hilarious. That's what we're getting at. Okay.
They're great. Okay, Sarah.
But we should kind of start out probably with talking about the setting of this story, a bit of the Republic Fair, Valo, and what we are getting ourselves into in this story.
Yes.
What do you think of Lenosia or Lenosia?
Lanisa City, I think it's called.
Lanisa City?
Yeah.
Well, I said it wrong for 2 books. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
All good.
Yeah, Lanisa City and its parts.
You know, we've talked a little bit about the Republic Fair already in the Rising Storm discussion that we did, but I will say just again, I love the Republic Fair. I love that you have the world pavilions, 42 floating islands that represent different planets and different cultures, and you can kind of go and hop from one to the next, and it's just like a taste of the galaxy. And it's called the Spirit of Unity. It's supposed to be this sort of unifying event, so it's ironic in a way that everything that could go wrong can go wrong.
It has to.
I don't know if that's symbolic of what's to come, and just to say, hey, Lena, so this is never going to work no matter how hard you try. And I think there's an element of that. Rising Storm presents this more grim outlook not so good, as the 8-ball would say.
Yeah,
I like that this one didn't get too dark, kept it fun throughout, but also made you understand the stakes of what was happening and the severity of it. And even when obviously Zine Morala appears in this book, which we'll talk more about, but when she goes to her home planet and it's destroyed, and the moment when Lula and Ram climb on the rooftops, and it's sort of the first time that Ram's like, oh, this is my city. This is my home. And he doesn't even realize that he's crying, and Lula wipes the tears off of his face with her Jedi robe. Gosh. And it's, he thinks of it as an all-out assault on the Republic and on the Jedi. So, you have those moments of deep emotion. And for Ram, who has just been so sheltered, so kind of insular his whole life, and that's how he's like to live, it's a lot for a kid to handle all at once. And you got to feel for him.
100%. It really feels like he's being thrust into the center of danger, more or less against his will. He's so content in his life and is, working to become a Jedi Knight, is working with his master and is doing his best, living his, more or less quaint life, and gets thrust into, I have to be the hero because everybody else is already being the hero in their own adventures and their own battles, literally right now. So there's a sense of sadness with that, but also a sense that, there's a lot of sense of sadness with that now that I think about Valo broadly and everything like that. But anyway, there's also a sense of growing up and like a rite of passage and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting to interrogate this city. And I do want to echo, going back, the world pavilions, we have like the entertainment district, the arts and culture district in this city. I was like, wow, it feels so normal in a lot of ways. It's kind of got zones, and it's hopping. It's a hopping city, which is just really interesting. And I mean, we've talked about this in the Rising Storm discussion, but I just think that it is a very compelling Epcot-like vision of this fair. And it feels so earthly in that way, but still obviously with like 12 twists, including the zoo. So
right. Oh, the zoo. Yeah. I mean, you got the barbs who serenade each other. You got the sandvols, the gigantic winged reptiles, which, you know, they say is, quote, rumored to never forget a face. I want to know what that's about. But I think that goes back to the infamous whiteboard that says dinosaurs in the High Republic, because these are basically just like flying
dinosaurs.
These are like flying lizards or flying dragons in a way. So there's that. And then you got the Ragskeith, I think that's how you pronounce it. And they're creatures.
Ragskeith?
Ragskeith. Yeah. They're creatures with too many claws and too many jaws. And I love me a good rhyme. That was, that made me giggle a little bit. I love that. But briefly summing up what happens in this book. So obviously the propelling call to action that takes Ram from his hero's ordinary world, you know, the everyday life for him, and thrusts him into action. It's the comms tower is down. The Nihil are attacking Valo, and he's one of the only people that can help stop it because he understands how mechanics work. He's been studying it his whole life. And if he gets to that tower, and he's the only one to see the Nihil drop the Drengir like baby pod on the ground, even though he doesn't know what it is at the time, but he's got to get that message out to people and say, hey, the attack is going to come. And once it does, he's got to go to Race to Crashpoint Tower and fix it. And he goes with his friends. They fight the Drengir. It's all great. We're going to talk more in depth about a lot of these moments, but, you know, they end up saving the day and his world just opens up. Likewise, Lula trying to find balance within herself, trying to center herself and understand how she grapples with her own emotions with such a monumental events. Because, you know, Lula was on sabbatical with Yoda during the events of the Great Disaster. It's why Yoda never shows up. So she was never involved with something on this scale. So once she's actually thrust into it, and she's got to deal with the idea of, could my friends die? What happens if they do? How am I going to feel about it? She's got to deal with all these questions for the first time because she didn't have to during the Great Disaster, because she's been doing other stuff. She's been on study abroad, but it's really great to see these two come together kind of on similar trajectories. And then like, how do they mesh, and what do they teach each other, and how do they interact? And it was lovely, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the getting thrust into like the larger world here and the story, and growing up and kind of having to grow up. So, you know, like the act of growing up is something that we all do, right? But having to grow up because of circumstances is a whole nother thing. And it seems like all of the Jedi are having this sort of situation all at once with, you know, how they interact with their order, and specifically with the Padawans. They thought they were going to live this one life, and obviously the hyperspace disaster comes along and does something completely different for them. And so there's kind of this like triumphant moment right when Ram fixes the comms and immediately hears Stellan. And I think that is kind of symbolic of the doing of the growing up, like the thing that we all do as like a rite of passage. And I appreciated that like positive outlook, the feeling of success, instead of just having to grow up, if that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we should start our conversation with Ram. I think we'll move from Ram to Lula because, you know, they are the two central characters of the book. But I personally want to talk about Ram's story through the lens of the hero's journey, and kind of like maybe break apart certain aspects of the traditional hero's journey. So, you know, you have the call to action. I don't think he necessarily has much of a refusal to the call. I think it's in his mind. Yeah, a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of fear in a way. He really has to deal with his own fear and has to deal with his own confidence in his ability to do it. Because the thing with him is that he is doing something that's really challenging him. And that's why he has to recite that, you know, the part for the part, the whole for the whole kind of a thing that we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But yeah, the part for the part, the whole for the whole, and each part for what the role it plays. Well, and he's a little bit of a nervous type. I think he's more shy. And he talks about how he never really
dueled with his lightsaber outside of training. So that's something new. And he literally starts the book fighting a Nihil trying to save the day. And, his master is like, calm your mind. If you calm your mind, you have a calm sword and you're one with your lightsaber. He's like, yeah, that's easy for you to say, bud, when you're not getting attacked by a Nihil person flying and throwing rockets at you, Yeah, it's all in his mind. That's the refusal. It's the refusal of those inner thoughts to take that next step forward. And, once he does cross that threshold, which I think is when he kind of has the run in with the guard and makes the call out to Vern to tell them, hey, come to Valo. We're going to be under attack. And then they come and help him out. And that's when he meets, his different allies. The approach to the inmost cave, I think, is the jail cell where he meets Ty Yorick, because that's kind of the lowest point. Yeah, okay, Ty Yorick. Sorry, come on.
Just had to yell her name.
So cool. But it's so fascinating to watch him meet her. She's got such a distinct, nonchalant, no time for bullshit attitude, which I love. But I want to know for you, we get that final battle. I think that is sort of the resurrection part of the hero's journey. It's when you use those new skills to overcome obstacles. And then the last part of the hero's journey is returning with the elixir. The hero is changed. Anything that was part of the ordinary worlds is now resolved, and there's newly acquired knowledge that is going to be used moving forward, so that ordinary world he started out in is no longer the same. It's completely altered due to the hero's journey into the special world. So for you, from your perspective, what is Ram's resurrection moment, and what is that elixir that he brings with himself towards the end of this book? Like, how does it round out his journey as a character?
The elixir is confidence.
Confidence.
As it should be for all of us.
Yes.
The elixir is confidence, and the moment where it happens for him, in my opinion, is when he convinces the Drengir that the Nihil lied about the abundance of easy, very ready-to-eat meats, delicious, fresh, alive meats on Valo, which turns the tides for the Drengir's allegiance in this battle.
Yes.
Nobody else could figure this out. Not Reith Silas, not Comac Vetus, not Orla Jareni, not anybody in Into the Dark, not anybody in The Rising Storm. They don't have to deal with the Drengir as much, but I don't see any of them coming up with the solution. This was so clever and such a moment of triumph that he's using the things that he has learned about them and the things that he's learned in his journey about perhaps the pliability of minds to kind of propel him to victory here by reasoning with them. And I thought that was really incredibly smart. I certainly wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah, and what I love too about the High Republic is it is showing the Jedi are not a monolith. And Ram is a great example of that. He thinks to save the day, he has to be a certain type of Jedi. At one point, he thinks, I am just so upset about all the stuff that's happening. I just want to go down there and fend off as many Nihil as I can. But then he thinks to himself, but that will probably just lead to worse things happening. That's probably just going to lead to more death, and we're going to be defeated if I do that. That is not going to help. It's the skills that I already have that I can utilize. It's being able to use those to save the day. And everybody has their role to play. And I think he is very similar to a character like Reith Silas, because his master, he's not really around much in this book, he was always wanting Ram to go out into the larger world as well. He wanted him to explore the galaxy, and that's not too dissimilar from Reith, who his master, Jorah Mali, wanted him to get out of his archives, get out of his books, and go explore the galaxy. So, but that doesn't mean you have to give up who you are. It's you take who you are with you, and you explore, and you help, and you contribute. But you don't have to fit a certain type of mold to be a Jedi. It comes in all shapes, sizes, skills, knowledge, all of the above. And I think it's wonderful to see his kind of culminating moment to come by using all of those hours and those days that he spent in his garage with the Bonbrax, with V18, using that mechanical mind of his to save the day in a way, like you said, nobody else can. And that's the beautiful thing about this book. And that's why I love him. That's why I love Reith. They use what they have. They don't change themselves to rise to the occasion. They are just even more true to themselves than before.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that all kind of goes into the quote that I mentioned earlier that I will get right this time, which is, you must see the whole for the whole and each part for the role it plays, not for what you want it to be, not for what you fear it to be, just for what it is. And this was kind of the mantra that Ram said to himself when he needed it most. And like, my God, is it so good?
Yeah.
You know, at the time that I was reading this, struggling with this, that, and the other in the world, and worrying, and also wishing it were another way, right? Just things that are happening in my life. And then me going, oh, wait a second. Ram is being taught this lesson in the book. I need to learn this lesson too. Maybe I can use this mantra in my own life. So I really found it valuable in that way, and not to deviate from Ram here, but I think that this quote really kind of puts into perspective the kind of thinker that he is and the ways that he can improve himself to become a better Jedi. Because what this tells me is that he is perhaps a bit of a worrier, perhaps a bit of somebody who maybe makes a mountain out of a molehill, especially when things get a little tough or challenging. And instead of looking at it one step at a time, seeing the big picture at the same time, and being able to work through the problem or work through what the solution might be. So I think it's really valuable, and I really like it a lot, and I'm very partial to it. What are your thoughts on this quote and how it relates to Ram's character, Brad?
This is exactly why I think Ram is entirely relatable, because how often do we go through life and we have things that we experience or do, and we try to force ourselves to think about it in a very specific way that fits what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you only see it for one thing and you get the tunnel vision, you lose out on all the other values that you can derive from it. So yeah, seeing the whole for the whole and understanding what things are as they are is so important, because it almost makes me think of, I don't know if this is even relatable, like Ferris Bueller. Like, life moves fast. If you don't stop and look around every once in a while, you're going to miss it, you know? So in some way it kind of relates to this, because it's telling Ram, hey, if you're so fixated on all the, if you're getting so caught in the weeds and everything, you're going to miss the actual life you're experiencing and all the wonderful things within it. And I think that's his wake up call of, yeah, my skills are awesome. Nobody can do this. I mean, we have never seen something this cool in Star Wars in some points. Like the fact that he goes into these Nihil ships and combusts the engines within, and he even taps into the Drengir, and it says he feels the nutrients of the Drengir cells and grabs onto them, and the Drengirs are like, what is this, meats? And you know, he feels them pushing back, but like only he can tap into that, because he literally works in a car shop. He understands every single part. He understands the thrum of the engine, the vibrations of every single piece of machinery he works with. And he can feel the force in that way. And I think that is such a wonderful, wonderful force power and way to tap into the force that we've never seen before, unlike anything else. It's incredible. Like, I was stunned when that happened. I was like, oh my God, Ram is my favorite.
Do you want to know what it reminded me of?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you know when we were watching Tartakovsky's Clone Wars?
Yes.
And Mace Windu takes all of the bolts out of the super battle droid.
Oh, yeah.
And we watched that. You and I watched that like 4 times over before I let you continue. So I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen ever.
Yeah.
And Ram doing something along those lines, even if it was different, it had those vibes. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah,
I was like, this is so good. But it ties into another quote from Master Kampar, which Master Kampar, I mean, we don't know much about this master, but like, he is coming in with the tea, with the much needed thoughts. He says, a living thing is very much like a machine. The force flows through organics, yes, and that is different, but we also have engines that keep us running. We have a central processing unit, and when something is leaking, it slows us down and sometimes stops us entirely. And I thought that was a great way, a great teaching, and a great way for Ram to reshift his perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes, when I would take a math class, I would see a problem and I would just like be like, this is a mountain and I can't climb it, and it's literally Mount Everest and I can't do it.
Oh my God, the word problems.
No, but then I would look at it and be like, you know what? Okay, I have the tools. I know the equation. I can think of it like I think of another subject that I enjoy, that I know really well, and I can break it down into its parts and rethink it in that way. And I think that's what allows Ram to be such a good Jedi and have such great success in the end of this book, is that he translates his way of thinking into a new challenge and allows himself to adapt in a way that is true to himself. And I think that is really incredible. And I love it when we talk about, this kind of goes into how we talk about the Force in different ways, and how Ram sees the Force through mechanics. But that doesn't mean he only has to see it that way. Just because Elzar sees the Force as an ocean, doesn't mean he only has to see it that way. Because seeing it other ways, allowing yourself to adapt or just expand your mind, gives you greater perspective and greater ability to understand and connect.
And he almost doesn't take on that challenge because he thinks to himself, he understands how things connect and how parts work together. He says the problem, quote, was organics, sentient ones anyways, had opinions and judgments and ways of doing things and ways of not doing things, and opinions and judgments about those ways of doing and not doing things, and it was all too much, really, and no theory or metaphor was going to change that.
Mood.
But then he realizes, like, hey, but the Drengir are organics, and Master Kampar said that they're not so different from machines. So let me try something out. And I love, he's like, hold on a sec, let me try something, and to me, that's some like big Han Solo energy, by the way, because he's just like, let me try something. And they're like, what are you going to do? And he's just like, hold on one sec, and I love that sort of energy of just like, let me just try it, that speaks to his mind. And, all the many times before that he's probably had to repair things. It's just, let me try putting this part here, or let me try moving this here and see if it works. It's a lot of trial and error, I imagine, in his life growing up. And it speaks to that confidence that he continues to build. And I love how he keeps thinking about his different masters' lessons throughout the book, much like Imri did in A Test of Courage. And they use all those lessons and they start to work out and they go, oh, okay.
The masters are wise. Who would have thought?
Wow. So it's kind of like that moment when your parents keep telling you stuff when you grow up. And when you grow up and you have the moment and you're like, oh, shit. Oh, I wasn't right all the time as a teenager. Wow. So I personally love that. And, despite his confidence that he continues to build, I do, by the way, I have to shout out again, Shy Boy Ram. I love it. One quick quote here was when he first meets, I think it's when he first meets Ty, or when Ty asks him, like, what are you wearing? And he tries to explain his appearance. And he thinks, this was another reason why Ram didn't like being around people. He had to explain himself and try to make things make sense. And it was quite frankly exhausting and a waste of time. And I just found that so relatable. And I'm just like, yes, I just want to live in my garage and fix things and be a badass. That's all I want to do.
Me too. There's a certain predictability to machines, and to, like, for me, it's jigsaw puzzles. At the end, I know there are going to be 4 right angles, and the picture is going to be contained within a rectangle, and there's something very safe about that feeling, and there's something very, oh my God, like powerful about that feeling, even in the predictability of that. But that can't be everything. There's got to be spontaneity. There's got to be challenge. So I relate to Ram's struggles a lot in this book, and his reticence to to branch out. Like, I get it because I will go to therapy and my therapist will tell me something and I'll just be like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. That's too far. And she's like, Sarah, you got it. And I'm like,
and then she tells you, Sarah, you have to see the hole for the hole. And you're like, how did you know?
Yeah. She's like, you're not going to have friends unless you reach out to some of them. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't need them.
Yeah. But you know, Ram thinks the same way. And when he does reach out to his friends in this book, he understands the power that has. And that's where we end up with him, you know? And speaking,
and he's right.
Yeah. And, you know, he takes the idea of see the hole for the hole and doesn't just apply it to mechanical parts, but applies it to himself and his friends. He sees that they all have roles to fill in this wider galaxy that he just didn't even know existed. It's not that he never wanted to leave his garage. I think it was just that was all he thought there was. He didn't think there was a whole galaxy out there waiting to be explored. And I think that speaks to, like, you know, our lives when we take our first when we move for the first time, if we ever do, or if we're ever able to go to college, and you go to college and you're just inundated with different cultures and different types of people and different clubs and classes, and you start learning. It's the same kind of concept here. And I love that he's like, I want to come with you guys. That's the role I need to fill. And Lula's like, oh yeah, we were already talking about it. You're coming with us, dude. And that was just like,
you don't have a choice, buddy.
I love it. And the last quote to end the book is, quote, Ram threw his fist in the air and felt the galaxy widen around him as they zoomed towards home, end quote. And I love the idea of zooming towards home because, yes, it's his home on Valo, but it's also his new home with all the Jedi that are there that he's going to go help. They are his new home, you know, this larger order that he's now a part of and wants to help out. And it's just so poetic. And I love those sorts of books that end with, you know, zooming, flying towards a much better future, a hopeful future, you know, and
I wonder what other book he could be referencing. 2021 Star Wars release.
So, anyways, I just love that. What are your thoughts on the ending for Ram's story, at least thus far?
I love it. It's so open-ended. It's so hopeful. It's so adventurous. It really feels like the beginning of a brand new story and not the end of this story, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because I would assume at some point in the future that perhaps we will get the adventures of Lula and Zine and Ram. And I love that we've got a new cute trio.
Yeah.
Like, that's so good. That's such a good feeling. And to know that they all have different strengths and really succeed together is just the loveliest. Don't you just love friendship?
The High Republic Adventures coming on August 14th. As part of Free Comic Book Day, there is a special High Republic Adventures comic issue coming out, and it's got Zine, Lula, and Ram on the cover of the comic.
Shut up! I didn't know about. They're so cute.
So we do. Okay, so we do know then that Ram is getting integrated into the comics, which that's really exciting. You should go look up this cover because it's adorable. And friendship goals. Oh my god! I wish I had these types of friends growing up. These are just this is so wonderful. I'm like living vicariously through them. I'm just like, I'm just so happy for them. Cute. I'm so happy they found each other. Yes. Oh gosh, that's going to be exciting. I can't wait to read that issue.
I'm really excited to read that comic, but I think the question for me is, will that story continue in later issues or will they pivot to other characters? Like, is it a one-off or are they pivoting to other characters? Either way, I'm thrilled about it, though.
And I also
make that clear.
Gotta wonder, will we ever see Ram in like other mediums, like a YA book or a Del Rey adult book? It'd be very curious, but I would love to see that happen. I would love to see it, Lucasfilm. It'd be really cool. So, but I think we're going to move on now to some other characters. I want to talk about V18 for a second. Speaking of Ram,
yes!
Before we turn the conversation to Lula, who we're going to talk about for quite a bit. So, hit it off.
I can't believe we have gone for as long as we have and not mentioned V18, one of the best parts of this book.
So iconic.
So V18, he's boxy. He's on the cover.
Oh, yeah.
He's a good baby.
Yeah.
He's painted purple so that people won't mistake his boxy figure for cargo and then have him travel off world.
I will say, Sarah, V18 kind of reminds me of AZ3 from the Clone Wars, which I know you're a huge AZ3 stan. I think you just love droids in general, which I
do.
I appreciate that. But did you get that kind of vibe at all from him? The sort of funny, kind of just always hits the comedic beats sort of droid, but also super useful. And like, obviously Fives rides on AZ3 as well in the Camino water.
You're right.
Yeah. I don't know. That just crossed my mind reading it. I was like, oh my God, I miss AZ3, but I love V18 too.
I love how he is thrust into the center of adventure. I relate a lot to some of the stuffier droids. I don't know what that says about me, but like some days I really do see myself in C-3PO. So, you know, V18 though, he is at one point at the very end when he's like, oh, but you know, fixing the comms means with my part means that I would lose my voice. And everybody's really silent. And he's like, I see how it is. I see how it is. And I mean, just hilarious. And he's like, I keep getting upgrades. I just iconic imagery. Iconic. Like, yeah. I feel like the Lady Gaga meme where she's like, iconic, brilliant, amazing, talented, spectacular. Because I'm just a droid girl. I really just like the droids. I'm here for Elzar Man and droids.
Yes. I love when V18 goes, sheesh, man. I was like, that's the first canonical use of the word sheesh. And he did it twice in this book, which you know he's been on TikTok too much if he's using that word. Sheesh. I think that's a young kid thing now. The kids say that now. Like, sheesh.
The kids these days say it. Are we old?
That's 100,000% from TikTok. I'm pretty sure.
That's really funny.
Because I see all those videos of like the teachers in class and they're trying to get all their students' attention. And they're like, watch this. And then it's like, sheesh. And all the kids say, sheesh. And then they all like quiet down. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. Anyways. This is not a TikTok podcast, but yeah, I love that use.
It should be a TikTok podcast.
But I love V18's vernacular, I think is what I'm getting at. I love the fact that he is not like a super formal droid like C-3PO. He's kind of just vibing, you know. He gets the engine. He gets a cannon at one point. He's literally going through the streets. He goes, oh, these snoggle mask muskwurts want to play? V18 is tired of being shot at. And, you know, he's like laughing maniacally. And Lula's like, is your droid okay? You know, and I just love that energy, that chaos. It's fabulous. It's great.
Yeah, honestly, so good. He'll have he's also quite confident about himself, which is so good. And he'll say, I'll have you know that this nimble but robust physique is capable of an unpredictable number of, and they said, do they retract? Of course, no need to enter. How would you feel about a mobility upgrade? Well, I hardly see how you could upgrade this unparalleled apper. And then he stops, gets stopped again. And I love that he's confident about himself and is very self-assured, but also is once he has these upgrades, he has a lot of self-determination and becomes very sassy. And I love that. And it makes me even more excited to go back and revisit the story, hopefully through an audiobook format, because I would really love to know what a narrator does with all of these hilarious lines.
Yeah. I want to see V18 meet Geode. I want to see, do they sit together and roast marshmallows and V18 roasts them with his engines and Geode's just sitting there stick with marshmallow stick? I don't know. I just want to know.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the image in your head. Geode is sitting around the fire.
Yes.
His marshmallow is on a stick that is leaned up against the fire pit. He's not holding it in any way, shape, or form. And then we've got V18 who has used his engines to create the fire, but is now, holding with one of his retractable things, a stick over the fire, and it's just talking. He's just talking all about his adventures, and Geode is just sitting silently. And you can just think about the silent judgment that he's inflicting upon V18 for bragging about his upgrades and adventures when Geode himself is just a Vintian from Vint, a rock.
Yes. Oh man, I gotta see that. Make it happen. Well, we know Geode is coming in the High Republic Adventures #6, so there's a chance.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
There's a chance.
I'm just saying that you and I should become artists and we can just draw all of our Geode fan art dreams. We could just put him with all characters. We could just make little mini comics. Maybe we shouldn't keep this part in the episode because I want to keep this idea. We're just going to learn how to draw. Well, but the good thing is Geode is a rectangle. So.
I have never wanted to be artistically talented so bad in my life than reading the High Republic, because I'm like, I need to draw these like scenes, these fan scenes of mine in my head. Like I just need to put them out. Maybe I'll start practicing so we can do more art. I got to get that Geode. If any artists are listening to this episode, if you want to like draw Geode and V18 roasting marshmallows together, and like we will retweet it like 30 times. Like I swear to God, like just please do
we'll
it.
Send
tag
you a
us.
Postcard for your troubles.
Yeah, actually, promise. I promise you, if you do that, I will send you Friends of the Force swag. Do it.
I don't want to bribe you to make art, but
we would be.
But I don't know.
We would look.
Maybe I'll draw it and you can send me the swag.
Yeah. All right, Sarah. Let's talk about Lula Talisola. This is a character I'm very excited to talk about. As much as I love Ram in this book, I also love Lula just as equally. And there are some really fascinating conversations because we haven't even mentioned yet Vernestra Rowe appears in this book. It is awesome.
Queen.
Jedi extraordinaire, so exciting.
Vernestra Rowe.
I was not expecting that name. I remember when you were flipping through the arc before we started reading, you're like, Brad, there's names in here I did not expect. And I think those were like one of them, even though Daniel mentioned it at the High Republic panel, like back in January.
We completely forgot.
Yeah.
And so I saw Court and Farzala and I was like, Brad's going to be so excited. And then I saw Zine and Lula and I was like, oh my God, Brad's going to be so excited. And then I saw Vernestra as well. And I was like, this is the Pantheon.
Yeah.
All our heroes.
Yeah. Well, to fill in some of Lula's backstory, it really picks right up from the High Republic adventures. And, we get the impression that Zine has parted ways with Crix. And that story is explained at one point. So if you didn't read the comics, you don't really need to, because it's sort of explained to you and you're given that context. But I would still recommend reading the comics because the High Republic comics are the best I've read in Star Wars in quite some time. But I love how well Daniel integrated these characters into the story. And Lula and Zine are like best friends now, and they've really grown close to each other. But like we've talked about, Lula, this is her first time fighting in the war against the Nihil, and it's kind of a lot for her to handle. And she really is battling with the emotions from within, and she's trying to figure out how to parse those emotions. And at one point she mentions how, a lot of Padawans at the Jedi Temple like never really have these conversations, and they just sort of keep them deep down and almost hide them in a way, which I thought was interesting. But once she meets Vern and somebody who is in a more higher level position, she gets to be out with all those things and let them out and not bottle them up. So what do her and Vern talk about, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I will say that like her conversation with Vernestra is partly born out of a jealousy of her, which is really interesting in their relationship because they're peers in age, more or less. And Vernestra is just, exceptionally gifted to the point where she's made a master with a Padawan or a Jedi Knight with a Padawan at the age of 16. Absurd. But Lula wants to be the best. And she sees Vernestra achieving some of this very early, and she's kind of jealous and frustrated. Like, why can't I do that too? Why? Like, what does she have that I don't? And I think that's understandable. We always do some sort of comparison of ourselves to others, and it's totally unhealthy because we're all on our own paths, doing things on our own time, and we know that there are people in this world who, have their moment at all different ages. So, like, what is Lula going on about? And it all kind of comes out in this conversation about balance, in this conversation about what does it mean to be a Jedi? And so there's this conversation. I'm just gonna go for it and read a bit of this page because I think it's the best page in the whole book. I think it's so brilliant. Okay.
Yes.
But Lula suddenly felt like a dam was about to break. She realized she'd never had anyone more advanced than her talk to her about this. And even with the other Padawans, no one wanted to admit what they struggled with deep down inside. I'm like just a huge ball of attachments, she moaned. I'm attached to being alive and to my friends being alive too, and to Master Sai. Every day I go somewhere new in this galaxy and feel attached to it, meet more wonderful people that I don't want to be hurt or killed. The attachments just keep coming. If I live to grow old, I'll have thousands and thousands of them. I'm even attached to the Starhopper, and that's just a silly ship. Ugh! She wasn't sure if her voice was wavering with laughter or tears by the time she was finished. It felt so good and terrible to get all of this off of her conscience, finally. But it didn't change the fact that she couldn't manage the most basic thing about being a Jedi. I'm such a failure, she said, rubbing her eyes. Vernestra's small, strong hand slid along Lula's shoulder and squeezed. Aw, Lula, not at all. You're so strong. And then they go on to have this conversation about balance. And it's beautiful. Go ahead, Brad. Just tell me more about it, because I just yapped this entire page.
Yeah, well, I do want to mention, too, I think the unique thing about this conversation is leading up to this, like you mentioned, that jealousy, that sort of prickly, un-Jedi-like, as it's referred to, emotion that Lula feels, and trying to keep that under control. And it's so funny that once she actually talks to Vern, and doesn't just perceive her as this like big threat to her becoming the best Jedi of all, and actually realizes like, oh, she actually listens really well. And we know that with Vern. She's very attentive. She likes to challenge Imri. She likes to challenge the people around her and not give them the answers, but to give them the knowledge to form their own thoughts. And this is exactly what she does next. So she says first, if Jedi weren't supposed to feel anything, we might as well be droids. And even they feel things if you think about it. The fact that we feel, that we care, is what makes the Jedi great. Being a Jedi is about balance. And she talks about how it's, balance within the Force, within you, within the wider world, with how it flows through us. And this is, again, what I mean when Vern doesn't give you the answers. She allows you to have deductive reasoning to get to the answer. And that is what is great about her. So Vern asks Lula, would you save your friends if they were in danger? And Lula's like, yeah. Okay. Would you save a stranger? And Lula says, yes, of course, because I, quote, care about life and the light. I would save them because that's the right thing to do. And then Vern says, okay, would you save your friends if it meant that you would never see them again? And Lula first goes, of course, like blurts it out. But then after she says it, she feels a little bit of hesitancy, but then quickly realizes, no, it'd be worse if they were gone forever. And then Vern says, okay, then you are saving them, not for yourself. It is not attachment. Sarah. Oh, baby.
That's the good stuff right there.
Oh. This conversation is my favorite part of the book. I get amped up because we keep talking about attachment. We look at attachment in the prequel trilogy, and it seems to me like the prequel trilogy Jedi cut themselves off entirely. They don't have the mindset of Vernestra, where you find the balance with attachment. It's not attachment if you're saving somebody for them. It's if you're doing it for yourself. And even George Lucas has talked about this a lot, the idea of being selfish and what does it mean to be selfish and to want more and to be greedy. And that's what we see with Anakin, because he is saving Padme for himself. He is not saving Padme for Padme. That's the problem. And I think the Jedi take it too far in the prequel trilogy to where even Obi-Wan doesn't think he can help Anakin because it's attachment. And he kind of distances himself too much. But in reality, you can save the people around you. You can love the people around you. You can do all of those things. It's just that when you start to do it for the wrong reasons, that's when the dark side creeps in. It's about your motivations. It's about not being selfish in your emotions. Attachment doesn't mean you don't care at all, because then what's the point of living, right? And I just love that idea. I love how Vern says it's really just about balance of choices and actions. And Lula realizes, It's not about cutting yourself off from love or not having emotion. It's about finding balance within those emotions and being able to still seek out the light and do the right thing. And I just thought this was an incredible way to phrase it. What did you think of this conversation? Kind of balling it up into this simple idea, and like also how it relates to like what we see in the present day Jedi. There's so much to talk about here.
I could talk about this couple of pages for an entire episode, because I feel like we often have conversations about what attachment means for the Jedi, about what the idea of the code means and what is breaking that and what is not. And I just think that these couple of pages are so beautifully put, so wise, and so truly thoughtful, because I don't think I've ever framed it like that in my own head.
Same.
This whole moment of, and if that's why you'd also say of Master Sai or Zine, even if you were never able to see them again, and she immediately says, of course, that is selfless love. To take your own emotion and feeling out of it and to say, of course I would save them because I love them and want them to live. Right. And that hit me in the gut, because I was just, I think, really floored with that level of selfless love on the page. We can think about that in our own lives, and maybe, I don't think we often think about that consciously, but the friends and loved ones in our lives that we just love so much we would take a bullet for them. Mm-hmm. I think everybody has maybe one person in their life like that, or maybe a few.
Yeah.
And to just see it so clearly articulated on the page was really powerful to read. And also, I think, a really great way to explain the idea of attachment. Because then, as you mentioned, like our prequel Jedi, our present, quote unquote, present day Jedi, they really struggle. And I think they cut themselves off from themselves as much as they cut themselves off from one another. And I think Anakin and Obi-Wan are both adherent to that mold as well as defiant of it. Because they clearly love each other. They call each other brothers. They have a particular rapport with one another. They're only a handful of years apart. They came of age together. So there's a lot of connection there, but they also somewhat emotionally distance themselves from each other because they're, I think, afraid of what that love means for both of them. Perhaps.
Yeah. It's funny when you think about being afraid of love. And I think that defines the prequel trilogy Jedi. Could you imagine in this conversation if Lula lets it all out and just puts it all on the floor for Vern, and Vern just replies, "Listen, Lula, let go of everything you fear to lose." How do you think Lula would have responded?
She'd have been like, "Bitch, what?"
That's the issue, because the Jedi in the prequel trilogy,
they lost their touch.
Don't teach people how to balance their emotions. They just say there is no emotion, there is peace. That's the Jedi code.
That's what's so complicated about the code here. It says there is no emotion, there is peace. But inherent to the experience of humans and the experience of being is emotion, is feeling, is crying and caring and supporting and loving and everything in between, jealousy, expectation. Yeah.
And you take that conversation that Yoda has with Anakin. If Yoda had the wherewithal to actually talk to Anakin about his emotions and his attachments to Padme and say, hey, like, just flip this whole conversation around. Would you save Padme if it meant that you could never see her again? Like, what do you legitimately think would have been Anakin's answer?
He would have said no.
Right. He would have said no because I've already lost my mom. I've already lost Ahsoka. I've already lost Qui-Gon. He's lost everybody close to him. And he's close to losing Obi-Wan by that point. So yeah, I think he would have said no. And that is the difference, because he's doing it for indulgence. He's doing it for himself. He does legitimately love Padme, but it's tainted and it's poisoned by selfishness. And that's why he falls to the dark side. Whereas here, Lula is able to separate that emotion and realize, no, I want to save them for them. I want them to live no matter what, even if I never get to see them again, because their survival is more important than anything else, because this world is much better with them in it than with them out of it. And I don't think Anakin had the capabilities to think that, although if Yoda could actually talk to him and not deny him those emotions, maybe Anakin could have gotten to that point and understood what that means. And that's what the difference is between the Jedi of the High Republic and the prequel era. They actually talk about what balance is. Like the prequel Jedi are just like, oh, the chosen one, he'll bring balance to the Force. It's like, what does that mean? What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's the sense of understanding the ways in which people learn and the ways in which people need to understand, and like meeting them at their level. And in that conversation, like Yoda did not meet Anakin at his level in
Absolutely
order to
not.
help him, right? I didn't lead him down the right path. But what's really powerful about this conversation between two young women of the same peer group and the same age, essentially, is that Vernestra, even though she's in a higher place than Lula is in her Jedi story, in her progress, she meets her where she's at because she fundamentally understands what it means to be that 14-year-old girl who is insecure, I would imagine, right? And I also think that what Vernestra says to Lula gives her permission to feel her feelings and to go through those feelings, but to also recognize when things are going too far, right? Because the there is no emotion, there is peace, and you must let go of what you fear to lose kind of thoughts and conversations here do not give permission to the Jedi to feel the things that they need to feel as people, like as a living being. And Vernestra is giving Lula the opportunity and the permission to have that whole conversation and not be shamed for it, to give her the permission to feel all those feelings because they make her stronger. And I don't know, I just want to like print out, like type out these 3 pages and like print them out and put them in a frame on my wall, because I think I need this reminder sometimes about balance in my own life and my own emotions and the power that they hold to make me stronger, to make me like emotionally tougher, to make me more able to go through my day to day and understand what I'm feeling, right? I think we all sometimes need that reminder.
Seeing eye to eye is so important, not only, like you said, as peers, but as Lula mentioned, somebody who is more advanced than her telling her this, who she had a bad first impression of. She literally thinks that Vern is a giant because of how greatly she is talked about. And then she's just so surprised to see that she's this like small and she's just tiny, like, oh, okay. She's not as big as I thought she was, but she is full of wisdom, and her, her heart's big because she's got a lot to say about, I understand how you feel.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you do that? Because I know I do. The people that I think are greater than me at something or other, I think they are big or tall or larger than life, quite literally. Like if I were to talk to them in a conversation, I would be looking up at them. Yeah.
I think we do that with celebrities. And think about it, Vernestra is kind of a celebrity within the Jedi Order. Obviously, like we're talking about here, Lula knew who she was. She heard the legends of Vern. Like her first thought when she sees Vern is, this was Vernestra Rowe? And I imagine that's what Rey thought when she saw Luke. This is Luke Skywalker? I thought he was a myth, and she meets him and he's this craggy old man sitting on Octo Island with a giant beard, and he is depressed. She's like, what? So
and
she
he's
probably
depressed.
Yeah. So she probably made Luke out to be much grander than he was, and to see him be this frail, small man who has cut himself off from the Force. So you can't set up expectations about people, because if you do, you never may see how they could surprise you. But I do want to go back just 1 second to Anakin and Yoda's conversation, and just the importance of like listening and giving honest, meaningful feedback. And I'm going to jump to the Revenge of the Sith novelization here for just a second.
Spicy.
Just to show you how much Anakin disregards Yoda in this moment. Like, obviously you see it on screen and it's a quick thing. It cuts away to another scene after that. And you think, oh yeah, maybe Anakin went and meditated on this. Nope, not at all. Yoda says, speaking of you and your vision and your fear, we are. The shadow of greed attachment is. What you fear to lose, train yourself to release. Let go of fear, and loss cannot harm you. Which was when Anakin had realized Yoda wasn't going to be any help at all. The greatest sage of the Jedi Order had nothing better to offer him than more pious babble about, in all caps, letting things pass out of his life. Like he hadn't heard that a million times already. Easy for him, who had Yoda ever cared about, really cared about. Of one thing Anakin was certain, the ancient master had never been in love. So for Yoda to just completely cut himself off from this, huge mistake, because Anakin doesn't see eye to eye. Here, Lula and Vern are, because Vern understands.
Yoda's a man who went through the High Republic. Should we be worried?
What does this guy go through? What does this guy go through? You know? But it's interesting, right? Because Lula is trained by Yoda, and Lula is under the impression that there is no attachments whatsoever, and she feels it jangling up her flow and twisting her connection to the Force. Who's she probably learning that from? Is probably Yoda. So, like, does he still kind of follow this logic even now? I'm just curious, you know? I'm curious where the lines are made between Vernestra having this sort of insight and then, like, what Lula was taught. Like, why is there that divide? Like, where is that gap in knowledge created? You know, is it from who they are apprentices of? I mean, obviously Vern was an apprentice of Stellan Gios, so does he bring, you know, he grew up with Elzar and Avar, so like he has attachments, but he understands how to balance those attachments. So is it a matter of your upbringing and your environment and your master relationship? It's very fascinating to think about. Like, what does that kind of jump into your head right now? Because I'm just...
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the culture, just of the Jedi broadly. And I think there's this very, you know, relatively well-known but unspoken thing that, like, the Padawans are fooling around. The Padawans are doing things they ought not to be doing, being a little naughty, but that they grow out of it. And everybody just doesn't talk about it after that point. We get that with Avar and Elzar. So I would imagine that it's a rather widespread kind of a thing. And I think it's something that's just never talked about as openly. I mean, we see that this conversation for Lula and Vernestra is really revolutionary for Lula. So what that tells me is that the culture of being a Padawan, of being a Jedi, is like, we're all struggling, but we're just not going to talk about it. And I know that you guys are doing naughty things after lights out sometimes, but we're just, I'm not going to mention it. You're not going to mention it. And we're going to go along our merry way. And I think that creates a really kind of toxic environment for everybody in some sort of way, because that culture of like secrecy and hiding one's feelings really builds up quickly for them. And I'm not saying that, like, you know, the Jedi Padawans are all living in a toxic environment where they, you know, are abused or whatever. I'm not saying exactly that, but that sort of headspace can just lead to cycles of concealment rather than open feelings and open conversations.
And I will be interested to see what Zine Morala brings to the table. I was so excited to see her inclusion in this book, and her story being so closely tied to Lula's. And, you know, even speaking on jealousy, Lula feels a little bit of jealousy and irritation towards Zine, you know, somebody who didn't grow up with the Order and actually grew up hating the Order, because the Jedi are like the arch nemesis of her world. And to then just be so skilled in the Force. Yeah. And to be skilled in the Force and save the planet during the Great Disaster. And Lula's kind of like, how is that fair? You know, the word fair is brought up a lot in Lula's thinking. But I do love that she eventually comes around to Zine. And, you know, speaking on Zine in this book, I thought she, you know, went through quite a bit. She's not as much of a focus as Lula, but I do think it is quite emotional when they go back to Trimant 4 and it's just a complete desolate wasteland. It almost felt a little bit like the red planet in Blade Runner 2049, just completely unrecognizable. The landscape, the city is dyed red, and all that are left are just these marauders, these elders who were left behind, all because, you know, when the great disaster happened, one of the moons got hit by the main hull of the Legacy run, and it missile.
Oh my! When I read this, I was like,
crazy.
What?
You wanna take it away?
Okay. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So it threw the whole gravitational pull of this system out of balance, so that the planet was closer to one of its suns, which affected its water supply and really killed the ecosystem of the planet. Like, you think about the very precarious nature of our existence here on Earth.
Yup. We are in a sweet spot.
There is no other planet that can hold life like this one does. And to think about that all going awry very suddenly is a lot.
Yeah, what is it like if we were tilted like a couple degrees one way or the other? We'd be either like a frozen tundra or like a scorching desert, basically. So
yes,
life wouldn't exist. So
amazing to think about.
Do you ever just think about how we're floating on a rock in space? And like, you know, whenever you have a bad day, just remember that. Like, you are floating on a rock in space in an infinite universe, and it is a miracle. Anyways, I just wanted to give you guys that positive.
You know what? I actually
affirmation.
Do think that about that sort of stuff a lot.
I do love astronomy, Sarah. Maybe we'll do an astronomy episode. Crack out the old knowledge.
You know, I wanted to name one of my dogs Tycho Brahe or Nicholas Copernicus or Galileo Galilei.
Wait, this is the second time we've brought up Copernicus on this podcast. We have to do a Copernicus episode now. Do you think there's going to be a Copernicus type character in the High Republic who is like, no, everybody, it's this way, and they're like, hearsay,
please,
and then like he could have prevented like everything?
Please.
I wonder who that'll be. There's got to be one.
Give it to me. Anyway, going back to,
it's gonna be Elzar Man. Elzar Man is Copernicus, confirmed.
Anyway, not my man, Elzar Man.
All right, so thoughts on Zine.
Back to Zine. I think that the ultimate relationship that she has with Lula is really great, because from the moment that they're introduced in the High Republic Adventures comics, we know that they are two sides of the same coin. They are introduced in parallel to one another, which is really kind of amazing. And they are immediately allies with each other. And Lula supports Zine, and Zine is ready to be there in action, you know, for Lula. And I think what's so interesting about this relationship is that Zine is just really kind of earnest to learn and has had her world expanded so rapidly. And Lula, again, is like her little bit of jealousy with Vernestra. She's a little hesitant and jealous of, or upset with Zine because of her joining in on the training sessions. Like, you know, it was the I was a fan before they were cool kind of a vibe. She's like, well, I got tickets to their first show. And she's like, well, I got front row tickets to their big stadium tour and you didn't, you know? So it's kind of that vibe, but ultimately they're still different sides of the same coin and come back to each other and have a stronger relationship with one another. And I really do enjoy that, especially now with Ram in the mix.
Yeah. Moving forward, the big question with Lula is, will she be able to keep her emotions and her attachments in check?
Mm-hmm.
And where will she find balance, if at all? And that's sort of where she leaves off in this book. She understands that this galaxy is just pure chaos. It is pure chaos. You know, it is, the galaxy teeters dangerously between chaos and order, peace and war, but she knows that she will find her part of that balance. You know, where does she fit in? And that's going to be the key to her becoming a Jedi Knight. And she wants to become a Jedi Knight still. That's her goal. She wants to be the best. And I will say, I mean, who else wanted to be the best? It was Anakin Skywalker. So like, hopefully she can kind of separate that out, and hopefully the knowledge and insight from Vernestra is enough to not lead her down that path that Anakin falls down, like getting too attached, because I think we're seeing this stuff on purpose happen early. I think she is going to be a little more susceptible to some of her attachments, and it just will be, the big question is, will she be able to understand the motivation for her actions?
Will Vernestra single-handedly save all the Padawans who are ready to get big emotions?
I hope so.
She's got Imri under her wing. She's got Lula under her wing, and I'm worried about the pressure on Vernestra Rao.
Me too.
But she seems to be really good at like talking people down from their like big emotions.
I mean, she literally did that with Imri.
Yeah, she is quite literally the resident community therapist. And maybe what the Jedi need is a network of therapists.
Yeah.
Jedi therapists.
That would be good. Buckets of blood. Maybe he could be a therapist.
Buckets of blood could be a therapist.
He would just be like, buckets of blood says get better. Buckets of blood says order a pizza for yourself.
You know who would be a great Jedi therapist? He's in training. He'd be such a good Jedi therapist.
Who's that?
Buryaga.
Well,
Empath Buryaga.
He is another Jedi who's trying to find his role, because in Light of the Jedi, he was like, do I want to be a healer, a warrior? Like, what do I want to be?
I would like Jedi Master eventually, Buryaga to be the Jedi therapist, and I think he would use his empathy to really calm the hearts of his fellow Jedi, and I think that would be a great fit for him. I think he should consider a psychology major in Jedi college.
I'm missing my Buryaga POV for sure, but I love where Lula's story ends up. Again, this book is very uplifting for both Ram and Lula. It speaks to a brighter future, and I hope that they're able to continue down that path, although I doubt it will be easy. And I'm sure there's going to be many more obstacles to come, especially as shit starts to gradually hit the fan, because, if our heroes are feeling like this with the attack on the Republic Fair, which, in hindsight is probably the least of their worries right now. The Nihil are just building power. The Drengir are everywhere. It's just chaos, and I imagine it can only get worse because we are only in phase 1. So
I'm scared, because if this isn't shit continually hitting a fan, like, what is?
Yeah.
What is? And it worries me. But I would like to talk about our one major crossover character. Spend a couple minutes on this character. That being Ty Yorick, our monster hunter.
Yeah. Oh, love Ty.
She plays such an interesting role in this book, because I did not realize we were going to get her, because we knew we were going to get her in Rising Storm because she's on the cover. But what did you think when she popped up in this book? And then again popped up in Rising Storm within the same sort of setting?
Well, I thought she was totally badass. I thought, just her riding the Sandval and coming in to defeat the Nihil ship, and she goes, "Greetings, younglings." And she's just like, "Hello." And I think Ty has a good heart. Even though she is a mercenary, I think it is really, 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 really deep down. Like, you really gotta, it takes a little bit. No, it takes a lot of bit, actually, to get to pluck her heartstring a little bit, enough to come back and save you on a flying dragon. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because Lula thinks, why would anybody leave the Order? It seemed incomprehensible. It would be like chopping off your own arm. And I thought that's interesting, as we bring up the idea of leaving the Order and what that might mean. And, much like Ram didn't know there was a whole world outside of there, how many Padawans don't realize that leaving the Order is a choice? And that's when you start to wonder, how much of a cult is it really? Because most of the time in cults, you kind of don't realize you can leave, and that's part of the cult mentality, is you just are there and there's no other choice. And now you have a character who is like, no, I left. You're silly Jedi Order. There's way more important things going on right now.
Well, you kind of have to wonder what led her to leave, because she clearly is so locked up about her own feelings and emotions. And she still has some attachments, I think, to some of the ideas there, perhaps. But I just pulled up the High Republic whiteboard from the, famed High Republic trailer, the idea whiteboard, and Star Wars wishes. And at the very bottom on the right side of this is Splinter Group Force users. And I'm just so glad we're getting that. And it makes me wonder about the role of the Wayseeker once again, and the way that they fit into the Order, and whether that's a path we're going to see other Jedi, especially young Jedi, somebody like Lula or another character like her, take in the future of the High Republic, because they are seeing other paths of living with the Force. Interesting. Just wanted to throw it out there.
Wonder if Ty will train a group. I would love that.
That's maybe kind of a sexy idea.
Maybe she takes a bunch of them with them, and that's what forms the Lost 20. Anyways, we'll see. Well, more on that.
They go explicitly to the dark side.
We'll see.
Oh, now I'm worried about Elzar Mann again. Don't look at me. Nobody look at me.
We'll talk. All right, so we're going to wrap up the show here with our odds and ends. So this is stuff that we didn't necessarily get to, but is just as important, and it's more of a rapid fire format where we get to go through and talk about things that really stuck out to us and that we really loved with the book. So Sarah, why don't you start first?
Oh my gosh, I am so thrilled to be starting first. And just here to shout from the rooftops that Master Kantam Sai uses they, them pronouns. Shout out to NB Jedi. This was mentioned quite casually very early on in the book. Master Sai does not have a large appearance in this book, but is talked about using they, them pronouns. And I read this and just was overcome with emotion, because not only was it awesome to see somebody with they, them pronouns in a Star Wars book, period, but within the middle grade novel specifically. I think that was a wonderful choice. I'm so glad to get a nugget more of LGBTQ, diverse gender and sexuality representation in the Star Wars. We obviously continue to need more of that. And we, talk about that, especially, I know we're going to release this in July, but we are talking about it and recording this during Pride Month. So it continues in spirit into July.
Yeah.
All right.
And we already have Tarek and Sarek too, who are also non-binary Jedi who use they, them pronouns. So yeah, it's just
true.
Amazing. I did like a triple take when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, that's so exciting. And just, we talked about at one point how we hoped more would come out of this era, and like lo and behold, it did. And it's just more progression in the right direction.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I really do hope that we get more of Master Sai and their story and their mentorship towards Padawans. Yeah. And I am really excited to see they being, in this context, the people behind the High Republic, but they better bring Master Sai back, because if that's all we get, that'll be really disappointing. But I was just really glad to know that Master Sai is non-binary, uses they, them pronouns. Felt good, feels good. 11 out of 10.
They were in the High Republic Adventures #4 comic, which we didn't know the pronouns then, but we got them in Race to Crashpoint Tower. So I bet we'll get more of them in the comic series. Hopefully, but hopefully more too in some other genres. That's the thing I love about what's happening with Wave 2 is we're interweaving different characters between different genres. That's exciting. So,
all right, my next one, I just want to go super quick, is that we get a little bit again of I am one with the Force and the Force is with me. It's interesting that this particular prayer, this chant, this mantra keeps coming back up. And it also lends, I guess, legitimacy to Chirrut saying that it's an ancient prayer. Not that, I guess 200 years is ancient in some cases, but that it goes even back before that. So I'm just curious about the role of praying and repetition and that sort of stuff, and phrases like, I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me. Really, really curious to see if we get more of that in this era.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's yours? Tell us another good stuff.
Tell
us another good thing.
The Bonbraks. They're so cute. You got Tiss, who's the young, surly one. You got Fesmix, he's the rowdy one. You have Breeback, who pops out later on, and from one of the, I think it's like Ram's backpack he comes out of. And I love, this kind of leads me into my next one after this, Captain Idrak Snat. So funny, so funny. And I love when he initially catches Ram and the Bombracks are speaking to him, and Ram's like, oh my God, I hope this guy doesn't speak Bon Breeze, which, like, that's the best name for a Star Wars language I've ever heard, Bon Breeze. And Idrax goes, hey, what did you say about my Grand Grub? That's it. I'm arresting you guys. And that was just like, I think that was the hardest I laughed during the book. I was just like, this is so funny. I love this. It just feels like typical, like, what did you say about my grandma? Like, what did you say about my mom?
My mom,
Yeah. And, continuing with Captain Idrax, I love Ram using the Force mind trick, the Jedi mind trick, to get him to the tower or one of the communication relays to send out a message. And when they first send it to Vern and Lula, and Idrax is a Nemoidian, mind you, as well, which is great to see Nemoidians come back. Idrax says, and so, in conclusion, what I have seen is the why of the when, where, what. And they're like, what? And Ram's like, the comm tower has been replaced. Sabotaged. Sabotage has been the comms tower, possibly by an unknown we don't know with the thing. And they're like, what is this guy saying? And Idrax is like, I am Padawan Ram Jomaram. And he's like, no, you are Captain Idrax Snat of the Valos Security Force. I am Padawan Ram Jomaram. He's like, wait, you are Padawan Ram Jomaram? You're under arrest. No, what's that? Where? It's just like so funny. And then the transmission cuts out. So I just love that. Another part where I was just cracked. I think the hardest I was laughing was with Ram and Idrax, because that whole thing was great.
Another thing that I can't believe we just didn't bring up until the very end of this podcast, because it's part of the whole plot of the book, and it is hilarious and so funny to watch Ram tinker with the Jedi mind trick and how he works with this person who he's trying his best and not doing so great, and he's just winging it this whole time, and it's very funny to watch it all unfold. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And
hey, I like a good Nemoidian too. Like, typically the Nemoidians have been portrayed as villains, so it was nice to see just kind of a funny, like, wacky Nemoidian who's being tricked. I just love that.
100%. Go for our next one.
Jumping later to when they're in the holding cell with Ty. Ty has a couple of funny moments in there. A couple of funny moments. Ty is hilarious, let me tell you. But I love when she first smashes the jail droid, I believe it is. It's called 5 Triad. And she smashes him into the ceiling. And he goes, ow, that wasn't very Jedi-like. I just thought it was hilarious. And then Ram mind tricks again Zerabarb, who is one of the Nihils that first come into the jail cell, and he goes, hey, go subdue some of your people. And he goes, okay. And he goes out and starts killing other Nihil. And Ty's like, that's a very creative interpretation of subdue, and just again, another comedic beat. And, when she eventually kills a Mon Cala Nihil, she says, sweet dreams, sweet seafood. And I'm like, wow.
Amazing.
That's really rude. That is really rude.
Like an 11 out of 10, hilarious, just absurd, kind of a burn. I just imagine her going, sweet dreams, sweet seafood.
Sarah, I'm going to let you take away our final one. But before we get to that, one last odds and ends here is Elder Tromac is brought up. So Elder Tromac we see in the High Republic Adventures number 4, and initially, they chase him to this moon because that is the last place where Crix had transmitted a message to Trimat 4 and had talked about how he missed Zine. But when they originally go to Trimat, they meet Elder Barbatash, who talks about Tromac and says how Tromac has the location of a very powerful weapon, something that could change the galaxy forever. It's knowledge.
Ruh-roh.
It's knowledge that people don't even really know to look for at all. And, we see in the High Republic Adventures comic, we went back and looked at it and I was like, oh my God, he gives Crix the location to the Stigmarn system And that's where they go in this book. So logically, Crix then gave it to Marchion Ro, and that's where Vern and Lula find the Nihil before they fly off to Valos. So clearly, Marchion Ro got that piece of ancient information that he needed, some very powerful weapon that he got there. So it remains to be seen how that is used. That was just a really interesting connective tissue there between, the High Republic adventures and this, and how it has larger story implications. I thought that was a nice little payoff for sure. And maybe 100%. More on that later. So
maybe as we
learn
later.
More. Yeah.
It scares me to know that Marchion Ro is assembling all these artifacts, because as somebody who really invests in Star Wars artifacts, the Kazrat device, what'd you hear
coming.
That from?
It's coming.
I'm just worried because he's not the person I want to have them.
Yeah.
Me and Marchion Ro, we aren't friends. So
yeah. You better get to that Kazareth device before he does.
It's mine.
It's mine, Marchion.
Anyway.
All right, final odds and ends here. Best one to end on.
My favorite thing, perhaps in this whole book, next to that serious conversation about balance, is the Drengir. They're back, baby. And they're better than ever. And by better than ever, I mean they got a funny bone. And by bone, I mean they got a funny
Vine.
Yep. And they have such great lines in this one. Just humor for days. Okay, ready? We're gonna do rapid fire on some of these lines. Okay. Do you speak meat?
No, Sarah. You got to do the Drengir voice.
What is the Drengir voice in your mind?
You got to make it up. You got to follow your own path, Sarah.
Oh my God.
We got to commit to this bit here for the listeners. Do you want me to do it first?
You want to go first, and go for it.
Okay. Do you speak meat?
Prepare to eat meats.
Aye, feisty meats.
Wow, meats with an audacious and ferocious desire to remain uneaten. It is interesting.
Small furry meats with fire.
Deceitful meats, traitor meats. Anyway, icons they are.
They are so funny. And then not only do they speak hilariously, but then they fly in the little car at the end. And I was like, they fly now? And I just think of a bunch of clowns getting into a tiny clown car and driving away. That's how I imagined it happening. And everybody's like, what?
I just,
ridiculous.
They are the best, the funniest, the bestest. Yeah, screw the Nihil. We aren't talking, but like I will talk with the Drengir any day, because like, wow, meats with an audacious and ferocious desire to remain uneaten is like the funniest thing I've ever read in my life, because which meats are desiring to be eaten? Like, which meats are not running away from you?
Yeah.
You aren't well liked, Drengir. But like nobody wants to get murdered and eaten by these Drengir. So I don't know what they're going on about this being shocking to them. But I don't know. I found this line in particular and the whole thing just an absolute blast. Brightened my mood, watered my crops. Like the whole thing.
Watered your Drengir vines. No, I want to know.
Watered my Drengir vines. There you go.
I want to know, are you worried that this Drengir technology is being weaponized? Like they can just drop little tiny pods and then they just grow exponentially? That's a little worrisome.
Yeah.
That's not good for our heroes.
No.
What did you think of the choice to make them funnier? Because obviously, like in Into the Dark, it's a much more serious tone. But the Drengir in this one are written much more playfully, like we're talking about. Like, did you like the sort of difference there? And like, how do you think that's effective just for specifically for like a middle grade book versus like keeping them super, super dark and scary? Like, does it just kind of add to the hilarity of it all and just make it, again, like not necessarily make you too anxious, but like keep those good vibes up even with such a intense danger?
Yeah, so this is a tragedy, and I really like that our villains, or one of our villains, is decidedly not evil. Like fundamentally, the Drengir to me are not evil. They're just like fulfilling their biological desire.
Right, they just want to eat.
Yeah, so I really like the very serious Drengir from the Into the Dark, and I also really like the funny Drengir here. And I think it works for the middle grade novel because, again, this whole story is a bit more upbeat, but also you have to think about the Drengir, and maybe I'm rethinking my own, like, why would they be weirded out about not wanting to be eaten? But then again, they're also dropped as spores, as little baby seeds, and then grown. So I'd imagine that you kind of grow in one place and stay in that place. So while they have like a collective consciousness, different strains, quote unquote, of Drengir are being dropped in different places. It's not like Drengir Bob on the Amaxine station, and then on whatever world, and then on Valo, and then on this other world,
Right, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how long the Drengir remain the big player, because that was something I was thinking. I was like, when we talk about the High Republic and the biggest danger imaginable, I don't imagine you write the biggest danger imaginable as like the sort of funny thing in this book. So even though I loved it, but I was like, okay, to me, that kind of signals there is something more happening beyond the Drengir. Because if you're able to just write them off this way and just make them super funny, I was like, there's got to be something else waiting for us, So I think something worse is coming. Remains to be seen. But I do love that we got a different side to the Drengir. It was such a pleasant surprise. Like, I thought they were going to be really dark, and I was just laughing the whole time. And I needed that, honestly. I needed it. And I couldn't put the book down because it was just too funny. And I was just laughing. But I want to know, as we start to round out our episode here, on a scale of 1 to 10 meats, what do you give this book?
8 whole meats.
8 whole meats.
Yeah.
All right.
Cooked to perfection.
Awesome. I'm going to give this book
tasty and delicious.
8.5 meats.
Wow.
So, I think that's a solid meat rating.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your final thoughts on Race to Crashpoint Tower before we close out?
Delightful book. Just an absolute blast. Very hopeful in this very tragic time. I'm looking at you, Rising Storm. Not gonna talk about you, but I'm thinking about you. And
we're having a little bit of a disagreement right now. Rising Storm and I.
Me and the end of that book, we aren't on speaking terms right now.
Like, good book, bad emotionally. Anyways.
Go listen to our review. Anyway, I thought this one was just really lovely. I loved how all the pieces came together for our heroes that we've seen in different stories so far. And I also love that this opens the door for a bunch of new stories. So I feel like all around delightful. Great job.
I wish this book were longer. That might be one of my only complaints, but it is a middle grade novel, so it is to be expected, but it felt like a much quicker read than A Test of Courage. And I think that's actually a compliment for the book, that I wish it were longer, because I was just so enriched with these characters, and there are just such compelling ideas for such a young reader audience. Ram is a great character. Lula is a great character. Having their paths merge towards one another, and they're both trying to find their place in this world. It is so relatable, especially as we start to come out of the pandemic, and we're all wondering, this new world that is blossoming before us, and it's not the same world as before. It never will be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something our characters experience. The world and the galaxy is not going to be the same after the Republic Fair. The world here is not going to be the same after COVID. So I think it struck at the perfect time as we start to see sort of, something on the horizon. We're definitely not done with the pandemic, but there's a little bit of a horizon, unlike, K2SO on Jeddah, when he's like, there is no horizon.
There's definitely no horizon.
There definitely wasn't.
A little bit more than that.
This is pre, single blast ignition of the Death Star on Jeddah,
Mm-hmm.
So this book made me hopeful for a brighter future, not only for myself and our world, but the characters. And I'm excited to see where the next set of adventures takes them, and what other lessons they will learn along the way, and what they'll apply from this book to help them achieve that. So I'm excited, very, very excited for this group. Well, that wraps up this episode, Sarah. I am so happy We got to talk about yet another middle grade novel set within the High Republic, and I can't wait for our next book discussion. Next time, we are talking about Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland, another YA novel following up on Into the Dark. So very, very excited for that as well. But until then, Sarah, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads at SEH221, and on Instagram at Sarah's Puzzled Pages.
As for myself, you can find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and Letterboxd as well. And if you're looking to stay up to date on the podcast, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure wherever you're listening to the show to subscribe and make sure all of our episodes filter right into your podcast feed every week, and leave a 5-star written review if you'd be so kind. It helps other people find the show and join the Star Wars discussion. We also have a Patreon where tiers start at only $1 a month, and we cover a lot of other things in a galaxy far, far away, including Star Wars: The High Republic Adventures, which we've been talking all about the last couple of months, and we just recorded an episode on the Revenge of the Sith novelization. So thank you to all of our current patrons who support the show: Adam, Amy, Anna, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Cheryl, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Jesse, Knights of Ren, Huang, Levi, Lindsay, Lucy, Marie Claire, Neil, Rachel, Sarah, Saber Bouquet, Skytalkers, T, and Travis. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. It means the world to us. Well, Sarah, that's another one in the books. I cannot wait for more High Republic because I am literally obsessed with this era, and I'm just so excited to be talking more High Republic with you in the many, many months ahead. So thank you all for listening once again, and until next time, we are all the Republic.
Bye.